second now. Okay, Trace, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you, Dan, and thank you, Jana. What we're doing this evening is beginning a conversation about how Tucson can become more resilient. There's a lot of physical things that need to be done, but if we need to activate or prepare ahead of time, my feeling is the strongest thing we can do is actually begin helping people to get a stronger social connections between ourselves and those around us. So what we'll be doing this evening is I've got a couple of minutes, 3 minutes maybe, of introductory remarks, and then we have a panel of three, I think, very insightful people. Meredith Keith Church is with the Sam Hughes neighborhood. Oscar Medina is with Changemaker High School, and Ramzi Vijani is with Living Streets Alliance. So we'll be discussing a number of possible tools that are available to have people help people to get together. So the question I think we need to consider is there an old normal to go back to, or a new normal that's basically the same as the old one, but with a few tweaks? Or is this something really different that's going to affect us for the long term? And I think, as trying to predict the future, the only thing you really can say is, time will tell. We'll see what happens. If you have had a chance to read the potential challenges link in the newsletter announcement, you'll see some of my own personal thinking about the issue of what may be forcing our hand. But the real question is, what should we do? The hypothesis of this meeting is that we will need to spend more time near home and more time with our neighbors. And the question is, how do we make this desirable and fun so people don't feel forced into it? Strengthening social connections may be critical to our ability to weather future shocks, whether it's COVID-19 or a local climate emergency, and from there to create the Tucson that we actually want. We can make our neighborhoods beautiful, safe, shaded, and fun, with thousands of rainwater trees and extensive traffic calming measures to reduce neighborhood speeds to pedestrian safe levels. Those are in Europe called either home zones or Wohnöffern. And these traffic calming measures can double as pocket parks, community gardens, and neighborhood gathering spots. We can also create networks of neighbors who help their elderly neighbors with basic needs of daily living. And we can ensure social distancing in schools by creating, I don't know what term we're going to come up with. I call them edupods, where the curriculum is built around using the neighborhood for service and experiential learning. The ways we respond to these potential future shocks can also have a great impact on how we make Tucson more sustainable in the long run. Our panel tonight is made of three local experts who have uh, work on projects that are also already closely related to the solutions to these challenges. Oscar Medina teaches high school in history, government, economics, Spanish, urban agriculture, social entrepreneurship, and environmental literacy, to name a few, I suspect. He currently manages a restoration ecology program at Changemaker High School, teaches youth how to grow organic food, and practices environmental stewardship. He has taken groups of students to Phoenix and Washington to discuss with their elected officials the social and environmental challenges facing Tucson and their community. Meredith Keith Church is a member of the Sam Hughes Neighborhood Plan Committee, serves as a block contact for the neighborhood's Building Resilient Neighborhoods program, practices annually the National Good Neighbor Day, and is also working on an initiative to start up a neighborhood networks program. Meredith and her family are car-free and choose their neighborhood because of how well it supports this lifestyle. They have spent many years exploring the best ways to build lasting relationships in the community, which contribute to the overall health of everyone. Ramsey Bejani is a master's student at landscape architecture at the University of Arizona and holds a BA in global liberal studies from New York University. He is passionate about integrating community engagement and iterative design to create inclusive, complete landscapes and streetscapes. Ramsey is also a Paul D. Coverdale Fellow and Assistant Program Manager at Living Streets Alliance, a Tucson nonprofit that advocates for vibrant, equitable streets. We'll start with the fundamental question. Can we and how can we create stronger support networks in neighborhoods that actually help us prepare for emergencies? But the larger question is, how do we transform Tucson so it is beautiful, affordable, safe, and nurturing for us all? So I would like to start out with Oscar, if you're ready, Oscar. Just a few minutes to go over your sense as the relevance of building social networks within neighborhoods. Is that really important to sustainability and resilience?
Good evening. First of all, Tres, thank you very much for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate the work that Sustainable Tucson is doing. I feel like y'all have been at it for years. I remember giving a short talk down there at the downtown library a couple years back, talking about the work that I was doing at the high school, and it's nice to be re-invited. So I really appreciate you for thinking of me and for this opportunity to talk. I work at Changemaker High School, where we're in the Naylor neighborhood. I call it the Barrio Naylor neighborhood, in between 29th and 22nd, Columbus and Swan. Um, our students come from 11 different zip codes, So we have students that come from the San Javier Reservation. We have students that come far west, and then as far as also east, Houghton, and then some students that come from the Catalina foothills. So our community is broad and encompasses several different wards in Tucson, but we are in Ward 5, in Fimbres' ward in Tucson. Um, the work that has been going on for, I want to say, the past 8 to 7 years there at Changemaker High School is really a model to begin to engage folks from the community and invite them, and for schools, right, to be the hubs, the learning hubs, the learning centers, uh, for community organizing and for really exchange of knowledge and exchange even of goods, right, such as food. So that's like the overarching goal and mission of the school. For the past few years, we've been serving more and more Latinx students. So we are, partnering with Prescott College and with Mexicayo Academy, which is a bilingual dual immersion elementary school and middle school. But so when we talk about like this question that you asked about, is it possible? It has to be possible, right? And I feel like that question, like I feel like many of our students and our community is resilient, right? We are products of resiliency. If you look at history and you look at the history of this country and colonialism and racial segregation and all of the institutionalized inequities, folks continue to survive and continue to find ways to thrive and create and build community. So I just want to pass the mic over, and I think that I want to just say that we must, right? And I think that schools have a really important role in building that community and building strong neighborhoods. Just to give you guys a little bit of what I do in my government class, we analyze the wards and we look at not only who our elected officials are, right? They're having a city council meeting right now. So some of the homework assignments for my students is like, hey, we need to watch the city council members and look at what decisions they're prioritizing, what they're putting on the agenda, but also looking at if those leaders are representing the needs of some of our families, and so I think that's just a little snapshot of what I do in my government class and how we engage in civically and research, and also begin to think about those systems, environmental systems related to food, water, energy, transportation, and waste management. So I'll pass the mic over. Thank you. I don't want to take up too much space and time.
Okay.
I'd like to hear from the other panelists.
That's fine. Meredith, you have some thoughts on whether building stronger neighborhoods is actually useful if something goes wrong?
Yes. Excuse me. I do have some thoughts. So as you mentioned in my bio, I've been working for a while in this neighborhood as well as in other neighborhoods in different places where I've lived, really trying to find the best way to make these connections because the neighborhoods are really where we're based out of. Whether we do other things during the day or not, we are always coming back to home. And so we're surrounded by our neighborhood community. So I really feel like whether there's something major going on or not, it's a really important part of just everyday health, because ill effects of isolation, let's not even look at the pandemic issue. Even prior to this, people have definitely suffered from not being able to have those connections when they have something personally go wrong. So then when you do layer on potential emergencies, issues that were unexpected. We definitely need each other in those instances, even more so perhaps than in everyday life. So it's just part of I guess, strengthening our ability to live on a day-to-day basis, and then also to have those supports. And that can be from caretaking for individuals, our animals, regardless of age. I know, we talked a little bit in the beginning about maybe older individuals, but also younger folks. People of differing abilities often need some support, and they might not have people who live in the home with them that are able to provide that, particularly if we're dealing with something related to extreme heat, or again, those outside factors that we can't always plan on. Food sharing is another one that's big. Something as small as, does one neighbor have a grapefruit tree and someone else has chickens, and, that sort of thing, where, maybe it's not that we all have huge, backyard, gardens, but just some things like that can also help if someone is in need of something, eggs, etc. So I think that strong communities in these ways, as well as, again, providing that person-to-person contact, because while we need food and shelter and those types of things, I think we really can underestimate how much we need other people, and that human interaction in order to become and maintain healthy on a regular basis, as well as to really be strong and resilient during these challenging times. So folks can do time trades, for example, within neighborhoods. They can share directly resources. I mentioned food, but there are other things. Certainly, if something needs attention in the home, people can combine resources. And we've lived in neighborhoods actually that had, for example, a tool sharing library within the neighborhood. So, sometimes you just need to fix something and you don't have that thing. If you can't get to the store, if something's going on and you can't leave your home, but you have this network very close, you can run down the street, make a phone call, that type of thing. So, I could go on, and I, want to be careful about time. Those are just a few of the ways I feel that are why we need these strong neighborhood connections, how important it is for everyday resilience as well as for unexpected issues.
Thank you, Meredith. And how about you, Ramsey? Is there any importance in building social networks in communities if we have to respond to an emergency? You're muted. Let's see.
Can you all hear me?
There we go.
Yes, now we can.
Okay. Didn't do anything, but it started working. So let's try. So I'm Ramsey. Thank you all, Trez and Sustainable Tucson, for inviting me here as a voice of Living Truth Alliance. For those of you who aren't familiar with Living Truth Alliance, we're most famous in Tucson for the Open Streets event we do, Cyclovia Tucson, which is an open street event that happens across different locations in the city where people are out biking and walking and really just enjoying the Tucson community. But we do other things also, and I'll get into them more as we go along with this question. So I really think it's fundamental that we talk about neighborhoods and the social connections inside of these neighborhoods when we talk about resiliency, because any viable functional resiliency for Tucson as a whole has to be holistic and across every layer and aspect of our community, right? Like, if you tell me that a canoe is 85% waterproof, it's not a canoe, right? It doesn't function anymore. So like similarly, we can't have a resilient Tucson without having a resilient Tucson neighborhood. And the neighborhood is really like the fundamental basic unit of our urban fabric. right? Like it's the smallest indivisible Lego block in the city we're all collectively building. You have your family, and then outside of that, you have your neighborhood. So it's fundamental in having a solid foundation for a resilient Tucson. How that gets into what Living Streets Alliance and the work we do is that we're an advocacy organization that really thinks that streets should be for people and that they should be utilized as public spaces to connect people to each other and to their city at large. And the majority of our public space inside of Tucson and in cities across America is streetscapes. And it doesn't feel like that because the way we've built our streetscapes don't necessarily prioritize individual people or just people out walking about, biking about, busing about, right? Like unless you're in a private automobile, you really can't benefit from the fruits of the street network that we've built up. And so if we're going to access all of the services that Meredith mentioned and counteract the isolation that she addressed, and if we're going to connect to the schools and the great work that Oscar and his fellow teachers are doing, like we need a street network that responds to the needs of people as people. And the term that's used is the complete street, a street that works for someone, whether you're 8 years old or 80 years old. No matter how you get around, the street will work for you and get you where you want to go safely and equitably and comfortably.
Okay. Oscar, do you have any examples of how your students are working with the neighborhoods, their neighbors, and what they may have gotten as a result of that? Oscar's screen is frozen. How about you, Meredith? Is there, you've been involved in a number of different activities in Sam Hughes. Are there examples that you could point to about how people have been able to build connections and help each other because of that?
Yes, so I have a few different examples, both from that have been experienced and some that are ideas that are being explored or that have been explored in other places where I've been. So, for example, in Sam Hughes, we do have the Building a Resilient Neighborhood group, which specifically looks for block connectors or liaisons. And as mentioned in the introduction, I'm serving as one of those. So, folks that have the responsibility for their particular block or section of their street to just get to know their neighbors in whatever way that works best, so that there's a point of contact who could keep contact information, for example, phone numbers, emails, etc., beyond just knocking on the door. So just kind of knowing the lay of the land, who's where, having one point of contact if someone is going out of town or if they're having an issue and maybe they've knocked on the door and you're not home, that kind of thing. So just some organization around this person is the block contact and they can get information to folks. And if we did have a situation where we needed to go around and check on people or know who was in town or had people staying within their home, that kind of thing, that individual would be responsible for that. Now, we have a really big neighborhood, so we definitely haven't been able to secure a block liaison for every single block. But, we continue to ask the question on a regular basis. And as new people come in and as, people are able to join on, we're seeking as many of those folks as possible. So that's one thing that's been used. And I actually have been doing the National Good Neighbor Day activities in conjunction with, that particular group, because it's a good opportunity, even if you knew folks, maybe you met them a couple of years ago. It's not just a, hi, I'm your liaison and now I'm gone thing. So it's a sort of an excuse, if you will, or a regular reminder to check in with everyone, see how everybody's doing, have their situation change. If there are rentals in the neighborhood, this is a good time to identify, have people come and gone, or is there one person new out of the three that were there, that kind of thing. So that's been really great. And then another program that we're working on now is neighborhood networks. And I have been in other neighborhoods that have used these, and they're essentially sort of affinity groups is one name for them, or support groups, groups that join around a common interest or characteristic. So folks from a certain generation, for example, or people who want to discuss a book each month, walkers, runner, there's kind of no end to the possibilities, with the idea that it doesn't have to be a big group. It could be 2 people or 3 people. And so it's grabbing onto something else that we have in common besides just living in the neighborhood, to get to know someone better and see them more often than just maybe when you walk the dog and that kind of thing. So that's another really great way to get people to connect on a different level than just, hey, I'm the block liaison and you know me because I live on your street type of thing. And then just really quickly here, a few other ideas that I've had. And when we were talking about this presentation a few weeks ago, I just kind of tried to brainstorm some other things that would be great. I think, especially to combine some of these solutions that we've talked about, is growing food together. So community gardens. There is actually a garden here, and I've not been able to find out what happened to it. It's called Caliche Garden in the neighborhood. And I found a 2007 newsletter article that Jane Goodall came out and cut the ribbon on the garden. So that was kind of cool. So that's a really great way, right, to combine some of these things. So for example, could a school or a youth organization spend some time, and I know this can be challenging, of course, and Oscar can speak to this, but certainly with schools there are a certain number of hours, and you have other things to cover. So maybe it's not a school, maybe it's a outside of that type of program, but an intergenerational project where folks are working on this garden. It's in the neighborhood. They're taking care of it together, and then they're able to utilize the foods and items that come out of it. So that's something that combines things. Of course, having those shaded parks and other shaded areas that you have on your list of resources is really important, because those are places to gather. And again, multiple generations of folks in the neighborhood can work on those shaded areas, the parks. I've seen that be really successful in other neighborhoods as well. And then you're outside. I mean, it's, the benefits are limitless there. And so those are a couple of ideas that I had just jotted down. If some modest resources can be found in terms of the community gardens, then we could do watering with rainwater harvesting, for example. So that's combining something else that we can sort of, put into there as a resource. And so there, we're potentially creating shaded green space with some of these spaces, helping provide healthy food options, to help, if we have an emergency, and that way, hey, we have food right here, so we're not as concerned about where we're going to get those things from. And it's building that continued connection through community, because it's an ongoing maintenance. And then the last thing that I had was a neighborhood exchange. So this is kind of it could be more of a social thing. It doesn't have to have a project behind it. But so let's say, folks from Sam Hughes do a field trip into Poet Square. And so Poet Square hosts some sort of get together. It could be a neighborhood picnic, with games and food and that kind of thing. And then they could swap, right, on a different month. So not just having to stay within the neighborhood that we're in. It's great to do that. And wow, could we build some more connections with other neighborhoods, and then, call on each other to help in times of need as well. So that's just expanding potential resources. So I have more ideas, but I'm going to stop so other people can talk.
Let's see if I can get myself back up here.
You're good, Trace.
Okay, great. Briefly, Oscar, did you have any examples of what your students have been able to do with the Naylor neighborhood?
Yeah, thank you, Tress. I do want to add early on, I want to say about 5 years ago, we started doing door knocking in Barrio Naylor, and we started to collect data, right? Started to collect information on the walkability of the neighborhood. We worked with Living Streets Alliance. They helped us create a walkability assessment. We wanted to really get familiar with the needs of what the folks in the neighborhood were interested in. Things like, a dog park at the Swan Wash, and so what we developed, or we took on a plan that was created way back by Drachman Institute. They put together a design for the Swan Wash, and we took it on as a restoration ecology project, where we put in native vegetation, native trees, grasses, different pollinators, and kind of fenced off the wash because it was a former dumping site, and there was like mattresses and needles, and the students would walk through the wash to get to school. Those that lived over there on the other side of the neighborhood, and so we adopted that park, and we began to also adopt the street with Tucson Clean and Beautiful. But I guess one of the things that I want to move into talking about, something that the young folks have really got my attention, and I'm really hyped up on, is really the power of social media. Right here in the neighborhood where I live in, down here on the south side, I live in a subdivision called Tres Pueblos, right in front of Sunnyside High School, and we have a Facebook group, right, Tres Pueblos, and in my neighborhood, it's a little bit dangerous to like do door knocking because, one, there has been excessive amount of soliciting in communities of color. In lower income communities, there's significant amount of soliciting, and folks are just not going to open their door because there's like somebody's trying to sell you something. And so the social media avenue has allowed for some of that community organizing to happen. So annual park festivals, they get promoted and advertised. People are letting each other know when they have their yard sales. This was, of course, before the pandemic, but more recently, just people are looking out for each other. Like there's people in the neighborhood that are breaking into cars, or instead of calling the police, people will share a message and say, hey, look out for your vehicles. There's some people that are walking in the neighborhood, they're not from the neighborhood, and so it's an alternative to constantly calling the police. And down here on the south side, you call the police, it takes them a good 20-30 minutes to get here. That response is not that good. So one of the other things is the growing food in your backyard and sharing it with your neighbors, or seeing your neighbors watch you grow food, is contagious. I've been sharing grapes and squash with my neighbor this summer during this pandemic, and both of my neighbors on both sides are growing small food, nothing big, small vegetable gardens, but we're outside, and we all have families, we all have children that are under 10, and so it's something that's not like a beautiful utopian environment down here in my community in Tres Pueblos, but there's a sense of like we have each other's back, and we know who lives here, and we know like what support we can provide, So I think that's one thing, that social media presence. If you're not on social media, you kind of don't exist, and and I know neighborhoods, and we're kind of lucky down here because we're part of an HOA, and something that I'm really excited about is that the HOA meetings are now becoming virtual, so there's more participation as opposed to before the pandemic. Like there was 3 or 4 people showing up to a HOA meeting, and our neighborhood it has over 800 homes. So like this whole Zoom thing, like some people may not like it, but man, it has people talking in a different way. So I'll pass the mic. Thank you.
Sure. Is have any of the three of you seen good examples of creating gathering spots within neighborhoods? The Complete Streets really offers some real opportunities to use that huge area of streets. It's what 20% of Tucson is asphalt, but um, the roads themselves in a neighborhood add up to at least a quarter of the entire area of the neighborhood. So, has anybody seen examples where people have actually been able to create a place within the neighborhood that uh, serves the people there? Yeah. Ramsey, do you have any particular thoughts on that?
Yeah, is my mic working this time? Lovely. Yeah, so one thing that the pandemic has done is really revealed how much time people spend in their cars, and what they can do with their day when they're not commuting, and also what they can do with their physical environment when they don't need to necessarily devote a bunch of space to their vehicle. And there are a bunch of examples across the states and really globally now where a lot of communities have started reconfiguring their streets by themselves to try and basically tailor the space to what they need in this moment. And I phrase that intentionally that way because there are also examples of city governments coming in and explaining to people that they're going to reconfigure the streets, and that is far less successful and far less well received in the community, as I'm sure you all can imagine. But through the use of just like basic DIY barriers, a lot of different communities have started basically creating play streets, streets where their kids can just play outside. It's not that you stop the traffic, but you basically create enough of a barrier so that if you're going to go through, you have to go through with intention, and you have to go through carefully with your car. And in turn, that basically allows you to let the children, give the children free reign as they run around the block. In turn, it's a way to create a lot of open space in places that don't necessarily have access to parks. You know, the Project for Public Spaces just released a new study today, and communities of color not only have less green space, but the green space they have in American cities is more crowded, right? So it is imperative that we start thinking of alternative open spaces that can be really reconfigured quickly based on the community's needs. And the street is right there, and the street is built at the moment for its first intentional use. And it's really time for people to start thinking outside the box of what they want to do with that space. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Are there, let's open it up a little bit to the rest of the people participating here. We're looking for the ways that people might make use of the space within our neighborhoods to see if we can actually use those to connect people so that we're not surrounded by strangers. Are there any thoughts on that people would like to raise? I should have. Okay. Bettina, You have to unmute.
Yeah, Bettina, you're muted. Okay, good.
I got it. Sorry. Yeah, on that idea that Ramsey just mentioned of the children using the street, thinking also, of Meredith's idea about sharing food and so on. I think a regular Saturday morning street opening of people putting tables out and putting, sort of and putting stuff that they'd either like to give away or sell or exchange, and being out if it's not too hot. Of course, I'm I'm calling from Montreal, but uh, in sort of at times of the year where it's possible, that helps people meet each other as well, and they can also have the children join in with a lemonade stand, and have coffee and homemade baked goods, and maybe place to sit around, especially if there's a tree where they could take their baked goods and so on, and a suggestion box where people can put their ideas of how to make their community more interactive and supportive. My concern is for the people in the community who really need help, often are people who are afraid to venture out. It's really hard to get through to some people. They're untrusting, very needy, and so it takes time. And I think Meredith's idea of just going around and just saying to people, here are some things that might be helpful for you in our community, to know that there are some social workers in your community, or here are some numbers if you're in need. There are people who can help you if you're facing an emergency, who are willing to give a lift, just to let them think, to be aware that in a very stressful situation they might be able to find some help if they're alone. And even if they don't live alone, sometimes they are alone if somebody is away, and then they're extra needy. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. Oscar, is there any potential for schools to think about how to utilize the neighborhood, the fact of the neighborhood, and the potential connections between students and members of the community? Is that something that can be used as a teaching tool?
Tress, thank you. That's a good question. I don't want to speak for other schools, nor do I want to speak for other educators, but I'm kind of fortunate that I work with a school leader. Some of you have probably met him or have known him. His name is Luis Perales, and the day that I got hired, 7 years ago, there was professional development and all that. Teachers get together and we get training on like what the curriculum is going to look like. Well, he's like, get on my car, and we're all like, we all squeeze into his Explorer, and he's like, we're gonna drive around the neighborhood, and he's like, you see that business? That's an ally. You see that business? Don't go there. Those people don't like us. He's like, this is where our students live. This is where they're gonna walk. this is the food that they have access to. You know, we're driving around, passing the Circle K's, passing the fries, and he's like, this is where our families are going to be engaged out when their kids are outside of school. This is where the park is at. You know, so we went down 29th Street. These are all the apartment complexes where some of our youth are living. These are the parks, right? Freedom Park there. And so, you know, he was very intentional in getting us to take notes. And he said, now you got to build your curriculum. Now we got to teach students how to read and write. And now we got to start teaching the students, like, what are some of the things that you are getting from these observations, and we build from there. So you know, that's like ethnographic, you know, anthropological work, but we used it to plan and to like really understand our students before they even stepped foot in our classrooms. So I think all educators should engage in that, right? I think that's really what it comes down to. Folks that are teaching in schools, like, need to be walking the block and need to be going to the stores. You know, I go down the street and I'll pick up some lunch at the carniceria right there on 22nd, and getting to build those relationships are super important with people. Once they see you, and then your students see you going to the same spots that you're going and shopping at, and there's a relationship that's happening. And there's educators that are doing that work.
Do you think that we should be using the neighborhood? I know Monzo has they've made a strong effort to use their aquaponics and gardens and things of that nature as a main teaching tool. So they're teaching the students numbers and writing and reporting and a whole lot of standard types of educational things, but they're doing it in a way that is hands-on. Do you think there's an opportunity to use the schools in a similar way, but expanding out into the neighborhood?
Yeah, I think there definitely has to be an integration, right? If anything, the pandemic has showed us that their food shortages are real, that they will occur, right? And then we saw that. And we also saw like the importance of like community food banks and like school cafeterias and schools providing meals. I think that there's programs out there already. You know, there's like definitely training programs. There's a whole like branch within public education that focuses on certifying and providing credentials for job employment. And we kind of take that route. Like we are telling students constantly, like, these are skills, green skills that are valuable, right, for the labor market, but also encourage our students to be entrepreneurial. Some of the parents at first, like, especially some of the parents of color and low-income parents, like, what are you spending an hour in the garden with my students? Like, some of them are appreciating that, like, well, they come home tired and dirty, but others are like, no, like, we did that labor construction work so that they wouldn't have to do it, right? And so we're taking a different approach and saying, no, like, we want to teach them like the value of work and value the work that you've done, but also like skill them up and be able to do like rooftop measurements to like capture rainwater and be able to like understand, like, calculate, you know, how much water is going to land on your rooftop and how much water you're going to need to supply your garden. So I'm trained I'm certified in rainwater harvesting, And all of those skills that I learned with watershed management, I integrate them in my lessons. I have to integrate them, and we do the calculations, and we take satellite photos of students' rooftops, and I help them do those measurements for their own roof. So I say, okay, well, now the thing is, like, do you have gutters, right? And how are your downspouts arranged, and what tank capacity are you gonna need, right, to supply whatever it is that you're growing. So I think those outside trainings are super valuable, and educators need to bring them into the classroom. They need to integrate them and explore. I think now with the pandemic, in the planning of reopening the schools, like, the conversation is like, the possibility is yes in the fall, and it is very likely that we are going to be holding class outside in the fall if we do gather, right? And we're lucky that we have the space. There's some schools that just have, I was talking to you, Tres, there's some schools that is straight asphalt, right? The whole yard is like asphalt. And I grew up in Los Angeles. I remember our entire PE field was just like asphalt. And then there was like a little bit of grass over there for the soccer field. But there was no gardens. There was no, shade trees and fruit trees. And so it needs to be integrated. I think schools can do that, and educators need to be at the table helping build that type of curriculum.
Right. Ramsey, the three of you are...
Hey, Trace, but before you move on, I think Bev has wanted to say something for a little while, so I want to give her a chance to get in there.
I didn't say that. Bev, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't done this format before. I've only done Zoom calls, so I'm stumbling through this. But anyway, what I want to say is I live in a really unique community by the rodeo grounds, and we have a senior single-family homes in the back part of our community. There's 200 of us, and in the front part, there's about 50 that are family homes with young children. And I'm so excited about this call because it gives me the idea.
Deb is muted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So it gives me the idea that what I'm going to do is go visit our neighbors in the front that have children and find out what they need, because not everybody here is able-bodied, but maybe half of us are. So there's 100 seniors here that need something to do. And the people in front with the kids need help. I just don't know what they need. So I'm just totally inspired to go door to door, knock on the doors and find out, because we all know that, they know we live back here and we know they live up in front. And it just seems like a perfect situation to help each other.
That sounds great, Brad.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
I was going to ask Ramsey, Meredith, and Oscar to speculate about what kinds of changes are realistic within a neighborhood to make spaces available that would help people make connections with one another. Are there things that we could do physically that would make both the education and the neighborhood gatherings and whatever easier to accomplish?
So one of the things that our neighborhood plan committee has wanted to undertake is actually working with Living Streets Alliance to do an assessment to figure out just that. And the neighborhood plan committee actually sort of just arose last year after some folks realized that the last neighborhood plan was dated 1985. So there's some updates were needed, and a lot of those things that had been on the list happened. So the neighborhood wanted to look at, okay, now what? How can we get better? And so I think that you know, as far as how realistic it is, I mean, obviously every neighborhood's laid out differently and has a different level of activity within their association, and different resources. So certainly it's going to be a case by case basis. And I think to the extent that groups can work with organizations such as Living Streets Alliance to do the walkability assessment, which I know Oscar had posted earlier, you know, to see what kinds of things are possible to change spaces, you know, that's one perspective. And of course, it also is going to take communication like this so that people in the neighborhood understand what are the benefits. Why would we want to have this conversation? Because not everybody is living their life in such a way that they're really aware of the potential benefits of changing spaces and doing things, I want to say differently, but not differently, right? So this all the stuff that we sort of have right now is really new in terms of history. So we used to do things differently. We were always community based. We had our tribes, we had our people. We were not this isolated. We didn't have all this asphalt. We didn't have all the cars, right? So all of this is really new. We didn't even have schools, right? We all practiced self-directed education through life. So you know, depending on the perspective of folks, I think that if individuals can understand the benefits and then really get behind that and be willing to put their resources behind it, whether that be time or money or, you know, sweat equity, what have you, I think that's really what it's going to take. And I'd love to hear, of course, from the other folks as well.
Any thoughts, Ramsey or Oscar?
Yeah, as Meredith mentioned, every neighborhood's different. Every neighborhood has different abilities, and different neighborhoods were built at different times and therefore have different infrastructure. But you know, with intention, time, and budget, pretty much anything is possible. And I say that in that order because one ideally leads to the other, and there's a snowball effect, right? Like you can start with intentional, very small scale interventions. Bringing your community together around a school to build traffic circles at the intersections of a school so that there's like, the traffic is calmed around the school where students are walking up around, you know, like making sure that there's pop-up cafes in your public parks that the neighborhoods put on every weekend or every other weekend so that people know like, oh, if I go, it's the second weekend and Sunday, if I go, there's going to be other people there who want to be there just to build community, right? Doing this with intention, so you do it at different times, so that you're not accidentally boxing people out. We don't have the means to go every Sunday morning or what have you. You know, with these kinds of small interventions, you can start to build a community, and to build a community, so you can eventually start to find the time and hopefully the budget. I guess I would say that like no intervention is too small. You know, it's like, and that's what. When Oscar was talking about teaching his students how to like measure the roof and how and catching rainwater, it's like that's such a great lesson because it really teaches students how intentionality with your environment can save you down the line. And so you're learning like planning and delayed gratification, and it's the same lesson we need to teach ourselves living in a city, right? Like we're kind of conditioned to believe that like unless a lot of funding comes through the pipe from higher up, we're kind of helpless, right? So we need to just like go ahead and like bug the city for money. That's probably not the answer. Like in some communities it is, but like for a lot of communities, like if we need to build the community first before we can have that kind of like infrastructure.
Okay. One of the things that I'm aware of in Europe is these things that I mentioned. They're called home zones in England and Woonafren in Denmark. The word Woonaf means shared space. And what they've done is they've made physical changes to the streetscape so that the street itself is the shared space, both for travel, but also they will create gardens or playground equipment or other things of that nature, which in many neighborhoods in Tucson we don't have very much of. We have, I'm not sure the percentages in Tucson, but it's substantially lower areas of parks than the national average. And you can't do much about that if you stay within the boundaries of the property lines. But if you decide that the streets are public use, then, as I said, you've got a quarter of the entire neighborhood is currently used just for driving through. And so I'm wondering what, I guess Ramsey in particular, what options do you think we have, both under the current Complete Streets ordinance and more broadly with what's being done around the country and elsewhere in the world to create more space for people to use?
Right. Mike's good? Okay. Yeah. So just to give a little background on one of for people who haven't seen images of them, basically the idea is that you inverse the idea of a traditional street. So in a traditional street, you have your sidewalks, you have your curb, and you have your road. And the division and the delineation between where people go and where bikes go and where cars go is very strict. What this creates is these lanes where like cars think like, I'm in the car lane, I can go as fast as I want as long as I'm going as fast as other cars. And like people who are walking are siloed on these small sidewalks that don't necessarily even exist, especially in a place like Tucson, right? So the idea of UNUF is you basically put all of that on the exact same level. There's no curb, there's no sidewalk, there's no car lane. It's all just one continuous plane. And you remove a lot of the traffic signage that gives cars priority and therefore supremacy on the street, right? So for example, if someone is crossing the road in America and the light turns green for the car has the right to go. It doesn't matter that the person's still in the street, right? And like this gets held up legally again and again across America, where like it's very hard to kill someone with your car and then go to jail for it or pay a fine for it, right? Like the streets do not prioritize people, they prioritize cars. So UNURFs achieve this idea of prioritizing people by putting everyone on a level playing field, and so cars naturally slow down. The question is, how can we, in a place like Tucson, create streets that create the same environment where people feel like they have the right to the whole street and cars feel like they're guests in the street without tearing out all of our curbs, because there's just no way we're going to have the money to tear out all of our curbs. And even if we did, we should probably buy sidewalks first, and we kind of need our curbs for the monsoon. So if we can reconfigure our streets so that the only traffic passing through it is local traffic, and that local traffic is passing slowly through chicanes and one-way streets, coupled with intentional block parties and outreach to let people know that like, hey, we're changing the street now so that you should be out of the street, you can reach that tipping point where it becomes like a new norm that, oh, this is a neighborhood where like the people on the streets in this neighborhood, it's not for cutting through.
If we were to deploy the sorts of things that you're talking about, do either Oscar or Meredith have any thoughts about how we might be able to use such things for whatever purposes, whether education or just getting together with neighbors?
Yeah, I would say that my hope would that they would become just a part of the fabric, a part of the community, so that they would be seen as open to all. And Ramsey mentioned, for example, in the course of making something new like that, maybe having block parties to call attention to the changes, and then those things could just become continual neighborhood, organized events, community events, again, to just continue the ongoing idea that this is part of our culture now, right? So it's not just a one-time thing. Having people get used to this. Hey, this is a safe place that I can go. Cars are no longer the most important things. People are also important too outside of vehicles. So, like with the example that was given earlier with the kids, right? At some point, that becomes just natural for kids to be outside in those spaces that are safe. Parents and other adults aren't having to worry about them, because that's just part of the culture. So I would hope that it would become one of those things that it just is. It's there. It's for everyone. It's for the neighborhoods. It's for community events. It's yeah. We become just so used to it that it's part of what we expect.
Sure. Ramsey, is LSA involved in any projects with neighborhoods in town to try to begin putting together some of these pieces? Do you have plans for a grand program of fixing all of our neighborhoods, or what's your?
Can I share something, Trish, real quick?
Sure.
I feel like you skipped me. I wanted to add on to what Ramsey was sharing. I think it's really exciting, and also what Meredith was sharing. One of the things that I ran into, challenges that I ran into with my students when we went out and did the barrio hikes, is they some of them were like, damn, our neighborhood is shitty. Like there's fucking trash and there's like, it sucks here, right? And that can be really dangerous because there's like a deficit mindset that can come with that, and the planning can be impacted. So I encourage my students to like look at the patterns first, look at the traffic, right? Where's the foot traffic? Don't focus too much on the waste. Like that's like minor, right? Like we got waste issues. Don't focus on like, look at people throwing the trash. Focus on who is creating the trash and where's that trash coming from, right? So if it's the Circle K wrappers and all that, like let's focus on that, right? Systemically, we got to change that up. And if it's too much, like, yeah, the trash is a big problem. All right, let's put some trash cans out. Let's pay a youngster to empty it out once a week or whatever, right? So I think that focusing on looking at where the traffic is at and then working from there, because like we're scientists and we're observing, right? We are constantly engaged in observations and identifying patterns. And that's one thing that I just tell my students to don't put up fences, like those fences and borders don't work. So in the planning stage, all that, right? Like it's real easy to be like, I don't want people coming into my property. And it's like these subdivisions throughout America were built like privacy and all that. Like, yeah, privacy in your home, that's good. But like this constant like fencing and higher fences and higher walls only reinforce like who can come in and who can't. And so in neighborhood planning, I think it's super important to encourage that, right?
When I moved to Tucson many years ago, a lot of houses didn't have fences and brick walls around the back. Now, a lot of them not only have them around back, some of them have them out front as well. So there's this tendency to isolate yourself, and that's just not the direction I think we should be going.
Can I just to segue, not segue, but this connects to something you just said and what we were talking about. So I've seen, that yes, sometimes the walls are for what people would like to have as privacy, which is one issue. Then the other issue directly relates to the traffic that we were just discussing, right? Because a lot of people have built the walls because there are too many cars on the street, they're too loud, and they're too close to their houses. So interestingly enough, here's another connector. What could we do about the traffic with some of the street issues and traffic calming and that kind of thing that would then not contribute to people feeling like, well, I have to build this wall because it's so loud, and at least that's some soundproofing, right? So that's just another idea I wanted to throw out there.
Mm-hmm. Are there other questions from the rest of the participants or suggestions or random thoughts?
I do have a random thought. I mean, as much as I hate having that locked fence out behind my house, if I didn't have a locked fence there, my bikes would keep getting stolen. I've already had 2 stolen out of my yard, so that is one of the issues we have, especially in Tucson.
It certainly is. Maybe having neighbors who knew you had a bike, and why is that person riding it when it's not Dan? But maybe not.
Another way to get to know your neighbors is to grow edible food in your front yard where the neighbors can see it. And I do a lot of work in my front yard. We have water harvesting earthworks, and I leave the weeds that I want, like edible purslane, and I will stop a dog walker walking by and say, do you know about purslane? And tell them my recipes and stuff like that, and I get to know the neighbors. And I also have moringa, which is an edible tropical plant that does well in the desert. And I kind of like point that out, and I say, if you're ever hungry, grab a few leaves. This is super nutritious. And so that's welcoming people, into my yard rather than pushing them away.
That's
One of the
great.
things I was going to say that you just illustrated there is to be in your front yard, right? To be there, right? So sitting on your stoop, or if you have a porch, or just in a chair, what have you, that's another way to interact and engage with people. And one of the other things that I have noticed in working with neighborhoods is there's this sense of, from some people, well, gosh, I don't want to pay too much attention to my neighbors because they might think I'm being nosy. So somehow there's this perception that we've gone from, in some instances, caring and being involved to, oh gosh, I don't want to notice what's going on because they might think I'm, butting my nose in where it doesn't belong. So, there's a difference, right? And in a lot of cultures, people, and certainly people different ages, particularly young people, are seen out more because people are paying attention more. So one example in particular, and I like to cite sources, and I apologize because I read this in a book and I don't remember what the name of the book was, but it was an individual who had lived in many different countries throughout the world. And I don't remember the city, but she was in Japan. And she noticed that, and she'd mostly had experiences in the United States, but then she went and lived in these other cities in other countries. And kids walked everywhere there. Kids as young as 5, 6, they're getting themselves to school, and they're getting themselves to the store, and they're doing things that people in this country, kids actually used to do. And one of the comments that was made when she would talk to the neighbors and the folks in the community was, well, we're all paying attention to them. We all know, right? So they pass any number of businesses, houses, what have you, and people are out and they see them and they know them. They know who they are, where they're going, about the same time they go to these places. So we're all looking out for them, right? So no one's afraid because we're all looking out for them. We know our neighbor's business to the extent of being able to support them, being able to help them. We know that Miriam over there takes her dog for a walk at this time, and if we haven't seen her, we might be a little worried. Or we notice that that, Bob over here has his recycling bin out and he usually takes it in right away. So it's been a couple of days. It's that kind of stuff that isn't being nosy. And so it's really interesting to just consider, right? Like how we could change our mindsets to really support this idea of the neighborhood connections, and that it's more than just a waving as they walk by, but it's knowing enough to know when to worry, when we might need to check on someone, when somebody needs help. And in this community, back to the community in Japan where kids were walking places, the kids weren't afraid because they knew they had all these people they could go to if something happened. And the adults would have noticed if, something, if they got hurt or, that kind of thing. So just to kind of, that was a long sort of agreement with Jana, but essentially being out there,
Sure.
being in front, right, it can make all the difference. So.
Hi.
Well-
Hi, my name is Danielle.
Hi, Danielle.
Hi, I kind of joined in a little bit late, but I got the part of the conversation about being more involved in your community and where I happen to live. It's kind of neat because of the way the community is actually structured. A lot of places or neighborhoods now have, community centers, but not only do we have a community center, for example, like once a month, there is like a breaking bread type of event. So everyone brings their own soup and they have a potluck once a month. And it's a great way to get to know your neighbors indirectly, which will lead you to know them directly later on. And so it's not like you're being intrusive because you get to have a chance to know everyone indirectly first and then build that relationship to know them directly and know what's going on and be there, your brother's keeper in a good way, not in a negative, nosy type of way.
I'm wondering if there are any ideas about what small projects people might want to do in their neighborhood to begin to get some of these things started. Uh, do we have anything like a strategy? Next steps?
Hi, Trace, this is Danye. May I add something that kind of addresses the last point and this point? Just a little. I wanted to say that I've noticed that I have a fair amount of neighbors who are like in their 30s and very, very busy. And I don't think this is very much on their radar. Like they're not really very interested in being their neighbor's keeper. They're really interested in focusing on their own lives. And I think it's a really different consciousness. So as someone who is really interested in trying to create more of that community in my neighborhood, I've been thinking about how can we draw in people like that? And I think that it has to include something that has a more social element, but also project-based. So I think people are oftentimes willing to show up for something very specific, even though they're very busy, if they like the idea of that specific project. And I think over time, there can be more of a cultivation of the desire to keep an eye out for one's neighbors. And that's not something I think that is super a part of consciousness for everyone. But I think that we can cultivate that. So that's what I wanted to add.
Okay.
This is Barbara. Could I make a couple of comments?
Please.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that about 6 years ago, we started with a project called Building Resilient Neighborhoods, as some of you may know, and several people who were on this call had participated in. We worked in Sam Hughes with that, among many other neighborhoods, and really excited to see how far Sam Hughes has taken this to be much, much more neighborhood building. we were looking at an extreme heat event with a power outage, and that's something that could happen here. That's a way that we can enter into a neighborhood and engage people. One of many different ways that helps. It's getting neighborhoods to be prepared to help each other and know who's vulnerable and have a plan and know what heat illness is about and so forth. The other piece that we have in our community is lend a hand. We're talking about food security, and some of my neighbors, one of my neighbors in particular, works every day delivering food and offering help with the Lend a Hand group in our neighborhood. They're all over town, and that's another way to gain access to people who are more vulnerable and more isolated and less willing to come out and get engaged in neighborhood activities. Those are just two ways of gaining entree and beginning to start. But it's real exciting to see all the very, very positive and much more diversified approaches you all are using to develop neighborhoods and in very exciting ways.
This is
Well,
Jan.
I really appreciate the work you've been doing, Barbara, on building resilient neighborhoods. Going off what Danye suggested of specific projects seems like a good point. Jana, you had something?
Yes, sorry about that, Trace. Sometimes we talk over each other on these things. But yeah, actually, I wanted to bring up, we've talked about how schools can connect their neighborhoods. Churches also can connect their neighborhoods, and that a church could actually be or a school could be a safe place that people go if there was an emergency, and might even have a generator or extra food and water and stuff like that. That for what are the things if we don't have community centers in our neighborhood? What are other community places where people could meet, and if there was an emergency they could get out of the heat if they had no air conditioning. Also, Danielle, who spoke before, is working with the charitable and faith-based sustainability group, and we're reaching out to churches to ask them if they want more trees and stuff like that. And maybe, I don't know, Danielle, could that be part of what we do too, is to see how churches might want to be more connected with their community?
Are you asking me a question, or?
Yeah, I am. I'm throwing up that idea. You're reaching out to churches where we're offering them, we'll help you put in some trees, which is a benefit to the community to have trees on the street. But maybe, maybe in that same kind of effort, maybe they want to give back to their community. Maybe they by having a safe house for the community.
That can be a possibility. I do know a lot of churches have their own Easter events or if they believe in Halloween, that kind of unites the community, and they try to invite most of the community that way. But another way of looking at embracing a larger population of the community is asking churches, say, hey, whenever there is a power outage or something like that, would you be willing to, if you have a generator, would you be willing to let the public come in and watch movies or something like that? And that opens that conversation of doing more. And some churches would totally be interested in that because it allows them to outreach to more people about their particular faith. Some churches may have reservations about that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
This is Dwayne. Along the lines of, I think one of the like if during this kind of a weather situation, there were a longer term power outage, it would be actually pretty hard to provide places where people could go to keep cool, just because places that have places that have generators tend to be hospitals, places that need that power on an emergency basis. However, given the amount of solar energy that is available, you would think that the people who have solar would be all right. But actually, in a grid outage situation, most solar does not produce because it relies on the grid's signal and the grid's energy in order to keep operating. One thing that I've thought of is we have a school system with these massive solar collection systems on them, but they are in the same category, if I'm not mistaken. They would also not function during a grid outage. But if the city and or school district were to make an additional investment, they could alter that situation and enable them to actually function during a grid outage. It would require some battery storage, and that would open up then a broad base of some cooling resilience in an extreme heat power outage.
I think that's a good comment, Dwayne. There are actually two things that would fail rather dangerously in the event of a long power outage. One would be cooling, and the other would be water pumping, because most of our water pumps are electrically powered. There are some that are gas, but most of them are electrical. So it seems that a possible thing for Sustainable Tucson to might consider championing is the idea of taking those places where there's schools with their own existing power supply, but can't function in a blackout, or water pumps as possible new locations for solar panels and storage, that if we could persuade TEP to change their integrated resource plan so that the first place they put stuff is all these places that would guarantee emergency power, that might be a very valuable thing, because if we use the solar we've already got, but made it islandable, and installed more in at the water pump locations, we would suddenly have both water and cooling that couldn't be cut off even if there was a prolonged blackout. And I think that would put us in a much better position than we are today. So that's just an idea we might want to consider.
Only on that,
If we
got a
do
question for
consider,
Danielle. Do you know whether Tucson, Danielle, do you know whether Tucson Water has generators that keep water flowing even when there's a grid outage?
I don't have an answer to that question, but I can ask someone.
That would be
If
great.
you just go ahead and email me that question, and I can forward that.
That would be great. I'll do that.
Right.
And then the other thing is too, with these, including schools or churches, churches might not have much of an issue with this, but schools may. But insurance policies, sometimes people are not interested in, having strangers or people who are not
are already part of their congregation on their property for insurance purposes. So that might be another issue to have to solve, to encourage, schools or other type of places to congregate, to encourage that type of sort of congregation during emergency situations.
Come the revolution, the first people we shoot are the lawyers. It's, or the insurance agents. That's certainly going to be an issue in anything. Dan put up a comment that the water pumps aren't being used. That's true, but my understanding is that they're kept in functioning order as an emergency backup or emergency water supply. So that's something to check on, but I think we really need to make sure that that is the case.
Yeah, they are in operational. They monitor them. They do sampling from them all the time, but none of them are running currently, just because all the water is coming from where it's been injected into the ground out in Avra Valley. So, and I don't know, and hopefully Danielle can find the answer, but I do believe that they actually have backup power out at that facility, which is where all of our water is coming from. That's coming into the system in Tucson. It gets pumped over the hills and into the city.
Sure.
I do want to mention that actually there is an emergency system in place because I called the library when I was doing research for a play I have if the power went out, and there is emergency in place. Like say there was a fire in Phoenix and they started to come into Tucson, and where would these people stay? And there's actually a network of libraries and churches that are already in place to take these people in some forms of emergency.
That's great, Shanna. Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Laura? Mike? Thank you.
Yeah, the Shade Tucson was mentioned in the description for the talk tonight. Is there anybody on that has recent knowledge of what's happening with the idea of planting 1 million shade trees around town?
Well, Stuart, you want
to... Other than that the pandemic distracted a lot of people.
I'll do my best. Shade Tucson is a coalition of nonprofits, including the Pima Association of Governments, who are dedicated to increasing the shade canopy of Tucson from an approximate average of 8% right now across the city to 15%. Some people will suggest that a desert city could support a 25% canopy. When we did the numbers, it's going to be all we can do, I believe, to get to 15%. At a rate of about 60,000 trees, 120,000 trees per year. In 24 years, we could get to that amount of shade. This is the kind of undertaking that's so wide and so broad that neighborhoods and churches and schools, as well as city agencies, will all be working together to bring it about. Tucson Clean and Beautiful is the principal driver. They've been in this business for many years of planting trees, just not at this scale. But there are a lot of other groups that have some experience with that. Someone wanted to say something?
I'll just add they just posted the job to hire the coordinator for the 10,000 trees project.
The mayor did? Ramsey, are you saying?
Ramsey, could you repeat that?
Sorry, I think there was a lot of people speaking at once. I'll just repeat that the job posting, the hiring freeze there's a hiring freeze across all the governments in Tucson and FEMA currently, but there was just an exception granted, I believe, for the director, coordinator, facilitator for the 1,000 Trees project.
Oh.
10,000
Great
Trees
news.
project.
Great news. Yeah. Laura, does that speak to what you wanted to hear about? Or did you have a more specific question?
Yeah, I was just, my main question was if somebody had done the math and what was being done to move that idea forward. So it sounds like there are things happening.
Yeah, not as fast as we would like, but we definitely did the math on the number of trees. You might know Ann Audrey, who's worked for UA and the Leaf Network, and she's doing a study with Brad Lancaster, our water capture guru. They've got funded to look very carefully at 6 key native tree species, their ecological values and assets for the community. And they decided to broaden it even a bit, look at some tall shrubs, and then even maybe look at a couple of the trees that people like but aren't really natives. And they'll be sharing probably mid-late September a report on their recommendations in terms of the place these trees would have in a huge forestation project. We know ecologically that you don't want just one species of tree planted over the entire city. It sets you up for pestilence or some other catastrophe that could hit one species and not another.
Right. I'm sorry, you said they expect to or hope to share the results of that study and Brad when?
Well, roughly mid-September.
Okay.
They'll be doing some more work through the end of the year. And we're not really expecting a whole lot of planting work. Obviously now we don't do that in the summer. There will be some more planting work in the fall, but the real gearing up is probably going to wait for COVID to pass, or rather to be tamed, before we can really get up to the amount of trees we'd like to see planted. Having said that, though, Himmel Park, which is also part of the Sam Hughes neighborhood, has had dozens of trees planted in the last couple of years, and there's more coming in, I believe, this fall. And the Goathead Weed Gang in Himmel Park has proved that you can do a lot of outdoor work, including tree planting, even in COVID, because you're wearing masks and you're keeping your distance. So we don't have to stop.
There's actually an advantage to getting out and planting trees because you're out.
That's right. No more cabin fever.
Indeed. Well, if there are any other questions or comments, please make them. Otherwise, thank you, everyone, and thank you, Dan, for setting this up. And thank you, Ramsey and Meredith. Oscar had to go back and feed his kids. So, but thank you all. And Paula says, Dan, do you want to remind us about Shane's project?
Yep, I was going to do that one last time. So yeah, just a reminder again, I mentioned it at the beginning, but in case you missed it, if this topic interested you and you have some ideas for projects you would like to put together to try and make some of this happen, there is going to be a virtual For the World event called Tucson For the World. It will be starting Monday, August 24th, runs through Wednesday, the 26th. And just look for a notice on all of the regular places you find information about Sustainable Tucson on the webpage, on our Facebook page, and it also should be in the reminder newsletter. So again, at the end of the month, that'll be a good time to get together, come up with some plans for ways to make things happen if you've been inspired by tonight's meeting.
Great. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
you.
Dan, I have a question
Bye.
before you go.
Daniel?
I just have a question. I accidentally logged out and logged back in, and so I lost the whole chat thread with all of those resources. Would it be possible that you copy that and send it in an email with those links?
I can send that to you, Danye. It'll be saved after the meeting, so I can send that to you.
Great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye all.